On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our conversation from yesterday, talking about a possible trade going down between the Lightning and the Ducks. What pieces can the Lightning give up as well as get in return? We break it all down here and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. On today's episode, we're discussing more of the rumor that is swirling around that the Lightning are trying to work out a deal with the Anaheim Ducks in order to get Frank Vatrano. We talk about, really recap from what we talked about yesterday, some of the pieces the Lightning are looking to give in order to get Frank Vatrano. We also discussed later on in the episode yesterday about how we could possibly get even more than Frank Vatrano in return from Anaheim. We talk about that coming up in just a bit. But first, I just want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the summer continues and the sports are not as sporting as much as they usually do, FanDuel continues to hook up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So on yesterday's episode, you definitely don't want to miss out on that, or go back and listen. Like I say all the time, we are available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Hit that notification button. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So on yesterday's episode, we were talking about, we started off with a very negative topic, really. We were looking back on the Stamkos signing in Nashville. Who's really to blame? Surprisingly, so far, a lot of you, it seems, have come around. You know, it's an unfortunate situation. We talk about, why each side should bear some blame in all of this. I mean, really, nobody, I think, in the end, really came out as better as the other. So go ahead and check that out. But we also spoke about a rumor that's been going around. It was first reported earlier this week by Roger Hicks. He's an NHL insider. He said that the Lightning have been going back and forth with the Anaheim Ducks this week, talking about the possibility of getting Frank Vatrano in return for giving Ethan Gauthier, Nick Perbix, a 2025 second-round pick and a fourth-round pick from 2025, which I stopped short of saying, but I'm going to say now. That's a big amount of assets to give away for Frank Vatrano, a guy who is essentially going to be a rental, if you think about it, because there's obviously no guarantee that he'll come back. His contract ends after this season. And on top of that, he does carry quite a bit of money on his AAV. He will be making $3.6.5 million this year. He is turning 31. I get the reasoning as to why the Lightning want to get him. You want to bring in a little bit more leadership. The Lightning did get younger. I think that's what the issue that some people have with this potential Vatrano trade is that, why after you just spent the last or really the first week of July getting younger, which was something that I think we could all agree was something that the Lightning really very much needed to do. And a listener put it perfectly on YouTube in our last video, said that really Hedman and Kucherov are the old guys on this team, which is really true if you think about it. But my reasoning for going after a guy like Vatrano is, yeah, he's going to be 31, but he still has a lot to bring to the table. He's probably going to fit into a third line, even maybe a fourth line role, depending on how this roster shapes up as we get into training camp and what lines work and what don't, and really, especially at times, what the Lightning will struggle with during the season. I expect Vatrano to be a guy that is going to be very versatile, something that we saw out of previously with the Lightning, Barclay Goodrow. Good comparison there. And I think that's the reason. And you don't want to have a team, especially a team that you're trying to win with. You don't want to have them too young. You don't want to have a lack of experience because, especially going into the season, especially with a big turnover, you're losing Steven Stamkos. We could spend a whole podcast on really how he was really just the lifeblood of this team in terms of leadership. But at the same time, losing that, you need to fill that hole. And yes, you have Hedman, Coach, Point, Paul, Cirelli, those guys to kind of be the new cornerstone of this franchise. But at the same time, you still want to have a little bit more leadership, especially when the times get tough, guys get injured. Another voice in the room to help out when you're running in rough waters, and I think Vatrano is very good with that. So really, I think that's the reasoning there. But with we're looking at the reason as to why the Lightning would give up so much in this situation. Well, if the Lightning are giving up so much, part of it has to be because of, I would imagine it would be assumed in this conversation that the Lightning the Ducks would actually retain some of that contract, most likely even up till, I wouldn't rule it out, half of his contract, which would be very beneficial for the Lightning. And on that end, also, you're giving up a little bit more just to relieve yourself more of some cap space. Obviously, Perbix there. Doesn't make a whole ton of money, but still, every penny counts for when the Lightning are trying to get in cap compliance, or at least have a little bit more breathing room in that regard. The draft picks, if you've been a listener of this show for quite some time, you know how I feel about trading away draft picks, especially at this stage in the game, especially after you just kind of revamped yourself with all these trades and after the season and the trade, especially that you made with Utah and getting some of those picks. I'm not a big fan of that, but if I would only be on board for it if it goes into what we spoke about towards the end of the show. If you didn't listen to that, please go back and listen, because really, I think that this is where Julian Brisebois could really kind of make a steal here. I mean, you see with what he did with Utah, he picked up Moser, which was a move that we did need. I know a lot of people aren't crazy about his contract, his new contract. Yeah, he hasn't played a single game here, and look what he's getting, especially with the Lightning. But listen, you got to do what you got to do, and I think Moser brings a lot to the Lightning blue line. So I think in the end, he'll play over the value of that contract. And then on top of that, you get a top prospect, a guy who moves to the front of the line is by far the best prospect in your system, in Connor Geekie. I think the Lightning could kind of do that too in this situation. I mean, it's no secret. It's been really no secret that Trevor Zegras, it looks like both sides in this situation are trying to find a situation that is beneficial to him. It just hasn't worked out in Anaheim. I still think Trevor Zegras is one of the best young players in this league. I think that any team that gets him is really going to be getting a guy that has a lot of raw talent, but you could still mold him into the player that you want according to the system that you run or to how your team plays. And I think that's really something that Julian Brisebois, as really all Lightning fans, should look into, or really kind of open their mind to having in this trade. And I think that, yes, if Zegras gets thrown into the conversation, you're going to have to probably give up a little more for him, which I'm completely fine with. But like I alluded to on last night's episode, think about the future. Yeah, you're obviously trading to win now by getting Vatrano, as well as giving away Perbix, especially when your blue line is so stacked. Really, I mean, when you look at what you have on paper, it's very crowded there, and you're talking about a situation in which really you're going to have to, out of the three guys that you're going to have to sit, it's most likely going to have to be Perbix, and especially with the money he's making, you don't want to have that guy making that significant money not to play to play hockey. So there's that. I would be a little bit more cavalier though in this instance. If there was a deal that you really want to kind of almost go all in for, it would be this, especially if Zegras is on the table, which I would imagine the Ducks are probably hearing some sort of trade scenario between them and the Lightning in which Zegras does come to Tampa. Also, with that, Zegras' money is probably going to have to be retained as well. He is making quite a significant amount of money, $5.7.5 million, up until 26-27, in which he becomes a restricted free agent, where the Lightning will then also have some more cap space, as well as he's restricted, so you don't have to worry about him walking away as soon as he's done. I mean, the other thing that you bring into the equation, if you bring Zegras on board, is he's 23 years old right now. By the time he kind of hits the restricted free agent market, he's going to be in really where we should imagine the prime of his career, and whether it be this year or next year, if he were to come to Tampa Bay, I mean, the prospect of him playing alongside Connor Geekie on a line, I think is something all Lightning fans could jump on board for. And I think that Brisebois should really kind of negotiate for Vatrano, but at the same time slide in that Zegras deal. Like, listen, if you don't want to give away Vatrano, how about we give you an extra little bit amount, and we'll take Zegras, and then maybe a low draft pick or something like that, which is fine. You know, I think at this stage in the game, especially when the Lightning are trying to relieve some cap space, you're trying to revamp your minor leagues or really just your young core, that's the better way to go. And to have two guys that are top 10 draft or really really top 15 draft picks, one of them being a top 5 draft pick, you can't go wrong in that regard for your future. And then you already have Kucherov, who will be kind of nearing his mid-30s, or at least still in his early 30s by then, when these guys start to really get going in Tampa Bay. You have Braden Point as one of the leaders on that team, I would imagine. If Hedman is not still around, I think Cooch and Point and even Nick Paul and even Cirelli, those guys, their names would be in the hat for captain of the Lightning. Who knows? I mean, that's really all dependent on Hedman, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But I think that a lot of Lightning fans, when you look at this deal, when it was first, or really this rumor, if you want to call it that, when it was first announced, you really need to think outside the box, because, and I firmly believe that there's more to this deal than just getting Vatrano back. I would be very surprised, especially after the deal that was taking place between the Lightning and Utah, that we're just getting Vatrano back straight up. That would be a little bit irresponsible, and especially when you're giving up 2 draft picks. I don't think that would be, like I said, very responsible for this team in the short term as well as in the long term. So let me know in the comments below. I know it's a little bit out of the box. I know, maybe some of you are not too crazy about that, but I think you add a guy, obviously he wasn't drafted as high as he was because of, he's likable. It's because he has the talent. We've seen the highlights of what this kid could do at only 23 years old and younger. And imagine putting him in a situation where not only is he in a scenario where he could actually win, but he's playing with some of the better talented players, at least on the Eastern Conference. So let me know in the comments below. How would you feel about Trevor Zegras, either just being thrown into this deal with Vatrano, or just having a loan deal in which the Lightning do get Trevor Zegras loan in return? Let me know in the comments below. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about really, what do the Lightning need to do in order to be done for the offseason? What is the next move that really needs to be done in order for this Lightning team to kind of go into training camp as well as the upcoming season with a roster that not only we could feel good about, but also a roster that could win hockey games and compete in this very, very competitive division. But before we get into that topic, I'm going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Indeed.Com. Now, listen, we are driven by the search for better. We all know it. It's human instinct. It's the competitiveness in us. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you could connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree. Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to recent Indeed survey. One of the things I love is that it makes all your hiring needs in one place, and it's super easy to use. I have a friend that just started his own business about almost a year ago now, and when he first started his own business, he didn't realize, he didn't plan how fast it would take off. And then as soon as the demand started getting bigger and bigger, he needed to hire more employees, and not just bodies. He needed people that could come in and do the job right away. And he used Indeed, and he was able to hire 3 people within the span of a week. And you can too. You could hire very good, very highly qualified employees with Indeed, leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So as always, I'm going to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow on our social media pages at LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. If you want to get in touch with me, go ahead to my Twitter page at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. Love hearing from all of you. And check out some more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. We're putting out an article later today discussing this exact situation about Frank Vatrano, possibly Trevor Zegras. Definitely one of the most exciting times or off seasons that the Lightning have had in quite some time. And you know, whether or not how you feel about the whole Stamkos thing, I still think that in the long run, this team will be better off, especially if they continue to make moves like the one we saw them make in the deal that sent Mikhail Sergachev to Utah. So now we're discussing, or really examining, obviously, the Lightning, we want them to make more moves. They need to make more moves. A lot of players left this offseason. A lot of significant players left this offseason, whether via trade or free agency. And some new faces are now in Tampa Bay. Cam Atkinson is one of them. Jake Getzel is one of them. Zemgus Girgensons, another player that came in. We got Ryan McDonough via trade. So a lot of moving parts here, as well as J.J. Moser, who we spoke about previously. But I still think the Lightning aren't done. And the question now remains, when should they stop? And I think that really, it kind of ties in with this potential trade with Anaheim, especially if you get Zegras and Vatrano in return. Because even if you get Vatrano, I think you could kind of tie a bow on the roster for now. But really, when we look at this Lightning team, obviously there are some things that kind of need to be shuffled around. The second line, especially Hagel, Cirelli, and Atkinson are projected to be together on that second line. I'm not a fan of that. Atkinson is just, I don't see him as a proper fit for that line. Now, maybe that just might be a question of shuffling things around and really trying to find out who works better with who. And maybe it's just a question of that, a matter of doing that. But I don't think really in the end that's the answer. I think that really what it comes down to is that you need another forward, maybe another 2 forwards. And Zegras and Vatrano are perfect for that because, like I've said before on this podcast throughout the course of this offseason, even when Stamkos, even when we would have conversations about Steven Stamkos coming back, I always felt like at this point in time, Cirelli is at the point in his career where he can play on the first line, where he's ready to take that next step. You put Point on the wing, and even now, I firmly believe you could put Getzel and Hagel on the second line together, have Paul move up to the center position, and then you could slide in, especially if this trade goes through, Zegras and Vatrano on that third line, move Sherry down to the fourth with Glendening and Chaffee. And I think that is at the point where you could properly say that this Lightning team would be good to go for the upcoming season. And I think, there's really not much else to do. Like I alluded to before, the defensive pairings I think are pretty solid now. There's probably going to be some shifting around here and there. I think that really now, if you look at the defensive pairings, if you want to kind of nitpick it, really all it matter of it is moving things around. Like I said, Hedman and Radish, that's fine. McDonough and Chernak, I don't feel comfortable with that, considering Chernak was very shaky last season. Ryan McDonough, yes, he's had a little bit of an offensive resurgence in Nashville. That could just be a scheme thing there in Nashville. But I would prefer to have someone a little bit more solid on that line with him, whether it be Lilleberg, whether it be another player from Syracuse. I feel like really you can't. I don't think Chernak, and I hate to say it this way, I don't think he's really made a case for himself to play on the second line just yet. So I think having him on that third line with Moser, who is a high motor guy, who plays very physical, who could also put up a little bit of points, where Chernak could just get back to basics on the third line, and there's also really not a lot of pressure. I think that's fine. And also, you're not carrying, you are carrying a burden, but it's not as if you're playing on the second or first. And then also the other variable that comes into this whole equation is the possibility that Chernak gets hurt. And then, now you're left out of a guy who needs to move out on the second line to work with McDonough. And that's always a daunting task for a defenseman. So I think if you put Chernak on the third, and if he gets hurt, he gets hurt. It's not that big of a deal. It's not like I said, you're replacing someone off the second. But really what it comes down to, like I said, the Lightning don't need that many more moves in order to be season ready. Now, they'll probably need to make some moves throughout the course of the season, or at least at the trade deadline. But that remains to be seen. It also depends on how the rest of the Atlantic Division does. I think that, Florida, what they're going to look like this season, how good they're going to be is up in the air. Boston is the same thing. Toronto, I never have any confidence that they're going to be a team. Yes, they're a tough team to always play against, but if anybody that has been following the Maple Leafs or have been aware of how the Maple Leafs do things, it just seems like they're just putting Band-Aids instead of actually fixing actual problems, where that's why prior to free agency beginning, I was saying that really the Lightning are just at this point competing against themselves in a way. Because there's so many question marks in the Atlantic Division, where really I think this is as good of a chance for them to compete and be at the top level of the division as really there has been in a couple of years now. And I think that this team, yeah, they may look unimpressive though on roster, but I think once they hit the ice and you get that chemistry going, and especially now that once they get over the hump of playing with the ghost of Steven Stamkos, and this fan base kind of moves past that as a whole, I think this team is really going to do some special things this year. And I think really at this point in time, it's not going to take that whole much more to really get them going on the roster, at least. So let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with how I feel about that? Are you, really also in that same breath, there's really not a lot of room for them to do many things in order to do much more this offseason, unless they pull off a ginormous trade in which you could alleviate some more cap space, whether it be trading away Chernak or whoever. So let me know in the comments below, and we're going to wrap things up with what's the next step? What's the backup plan here for the Lightning if the Anaheim deal falls through? We'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to wrap things up with our last sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, we love sports. We all love sports. That's why you're listening to this podcast, and this is why I'm hosting it. But it's the summer. Listen, there's no hockey. There's no basketball. There's really not a lot going on, especially if you're not a baseball fan. You really got not much to go on. But you could still enjoy the fun, the joy of sports betting with FanDuel Sportsbook, because this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long, just like the Kid Rock song. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Please go ahead and subscribe to the show, whether it be on audio platform or on YouTube. It really helps the show grow and reach more people. And that's just an easy, super way of helping us out as we continue to grow. And especially on YouTube, as we get ever closer to that coveted 1,000 subscriber mark. So help us out with that. So now, obviously, with any potential deal, there's always that possibility of things falling through, as we have seen in past years, especially at the trade deadline with the Lightning. And I am trying to keep a measure of optimism about this deal getting done, whether it be with Vatrano and Zegras or just Vatrano. But there's obviously the case where the Ducks, who are in a very weird place where they have a lot of young players, but they're trying to shed as much cap as possible. I don't know what the end goal is there, unless they're willing to go after it if they happen to play well at the deadline and they just go after a huge big-time player on a crappy team with a bunch of salary. I don't know if that's the case or what. I don't know. I don't know what the game plan there is. If you want to go and check that out, go on to Locked On Ducks. They run a great show over there, and I'm sure they could give you a little bit more of a better answer as to what the game plan is in Anaheim. But if this deal doesn't go through, because whether or not the Lightning get too stingy or Anaheim gets too greedy about what they want, what's the next plan? What's the game plan here for the Lightning, and how can they figure things out? And really what it comes down to is that I can't imagine the Lightning really doing much after this trade, or even if this trade falls through. In terms of free agency, I can't see how there's going to be any significant signings for the Lightning that are going to make a world of difference, that are going to have us sitting here saying, well, they figured it out, they could do this. And you look at some of the players that are available right now on the market, I'm not too captivated about it. I mean, there's Mike Hoffman, who we spoke about, I think about a week ago, about possibly bringing him in. Other than that, I mean, there's really not many players. Like I said, maybe Nikita Zaitsev. That's a good defensive guy from previously on Chicago. Made $4.5 million. Maybe you could get him to take a little bit of a pay cut. Who knows? I mean, that's the thing. A lot of these guys, if you look at the available free agents, they're coming off contracts where they're making significant money, or were making significant money. And quite frankly, the Lightning can't afford a lot of these guys, considering a lot of them are still in the early or in the middle of the prime of their careers. So I think that really the Lightning, as it stands, really need to make some sort of big time move here in terms of making a trade, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to make yourself better. Like I said, this team as it stands right now, they're a team that I'm cautiously optimistic about, but I still think needs some work. If I had to equate it to something, it's you're refurbishing an old Mustang, and you got the engine done, you got all the interior things done, all that good stuff. Now you just need to wax it and do all that stuff to give it a facelift. And I think that's really where the Lightning are at this point in time. They just need to wax on and make it look pretty. And that's pretty much what it is. Whether that be Tanner Pearson, who I personally like, who's a little bit of a cheaper option, whether it be even maybe a little bit of an older player in Jeff Carter. If you want to go defense, maybe Ryan Lindgren, who's restricted, but I'm sure you could figure something out. Justin Schultz, a little bit on the older side, defenseman. There's a good amount of players that you could definitely figure out a situation which, money wise, but like I said, we can't really choose that many players from the pot, considering the Lightning's salary cap constrictions at this time, unless, like I said before, you make another deal just to relieve cap space. And maybe that's what this is in the end. And maybe that's what the deal would eventually evolve into. You know, if the Lightning can't agree, or if they understand that they don't like Vatrano that much, maybe Perbix turns into Chernak. And then you could figure out a situation where you kind of trade Perbix somewhere else, and then you even have more money. So, you know, I think really, though, it's one of those situations that's ever evolving, and really we're not going to know anything for certain until really something significantly is said. As to where the time frame is, I don't think Anaheim's in any hurry, and I don't think the Lightning should be in any hurry either. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, I think it also depends on what happens with the rest of the free agent market. I think it's as players slowly sign with other teams, needs are going to arise, and teams are probably going to come calling for a guy like Perbix, maybe a guy like Chernak. But I would imagine that any deal that involves Eric Chernak is going to involve some sort of salary retention on the Lightning's part, which it sucks, but I mean, that's really just the nature of the situation. And that's what happens when you give a guy like Chernak that much money, which I think we could agree was a little bit premature for a guy that really doesn't play really does miss a lot of time, almost on a yearly basis. So let me know in the comments below. And tomorrow we'll be continuing our playoff rewatch of the 2004 Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll be taking a look at Game 3 of the Eastern Conference quarterfinals against the New York Islanders, so you don't want to miss out on that. So go ahead, like I said, subscribe to the podcast and hit that notification button, so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified and be able to watch it, listen to it, whatever you want to do with it. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.